All right, ladies and gentlemen, we got another huge update today. Going to be a very, very long video talking about abilities today, and this is probably one of the most significant sandbox changes that the game has ever seen. So let's talk about why this is all happening. In the Crucible, community feedback earlier in the year said that ability usage was too dominant, too much frequency with little to no investment, doing too much damage. Up until this patch, most abilities were on the same or very similar cooldowns. For example, besides Stasis grenades, grenades were on the same cooldown, which meant they had to be roughly the same strength as every other grenade so that the cost to power ratio could be maintained. Bungie has now made a change that allows those abilities to be individually tuned on their own. Here's one example. Flux Grenade for Arc Strider Hunters. Base cooldown, which is tier 3 grenade, went from 82 to 182 seconds. That's over 3 minutes. It is now a one-shot in PvP. Damage is now 250, up from 150. PvE damage was boosted 15% on top of that base damage increase. Projectile tracking was removed. A small amount of aim assist was added, throw speed was increased 117%, and it now sticks to all surfaces. So it's a much longer cooldown, but with a significant power increase. Here's another example going the opposite direction. Firebolt Grenade. Reduced base cooldown from 82 to 64 seconds, reduced damage per bolt from 90 to 65, PvE damage increased by 15%. So now we have a super low cooldown ability, but lower damage to compensate. Bungie is hoping this brings a little more depth to build crafting. You'll now be able to see the base cooldown of your abilities when picking them in the subclass menu. That's a very good addition. Of course, you'll still be able to see the actual cooldown of your abilities in your character screen. Couple of quick things to note. Like I said earlier, base cooldown is tier 3 because the game penalizes you for going below tier 3, which makes it longer than the base cooldown. But Bungie is looking into a way to make this more intuitive because, you know, tier 3 just being base instead of something like tier 0 doesn't really make the most amount of sense, even if I get what they're trying to do with the stat penalties. And cooldown times for class abilities aren't displayed because of a technical issue. That'll be fixed in the future. This change is part of a foundational change to prepare for light subclasses moving into their 3.0 versions, aka the Stasis format. They're using this to change the cooldown of nearly every ability in the game. One of the design goals was to reduce ability spam in the Crucible and put the focus back on gunplay. They buffed PvE damage of all grenades by 15% or more to hopefully compensate for these increased cooldowns. Melee abilities were not adjusted as much, but still got some tweaks, same with class abilities. I think this is going to be a patch notes first and then talk thoughts at the end of the video kind of video. So if you read the TWAB already, you just go to whatever time on screen for what I think of all this stuff. Okay, supers. Since basically launch 2014, super energy gain has been passive, with intellect being a main factor in your regeneration rates, along with orbs of power, perks, and killing stuff. It worked for a while, but considering how the game has evolved, some changes needed to happen. For example, in Trials, passive play is common in order to regen your supers to try to get an advantage. Bungie wants the best way to get your super to be fighting stuff, and not sitting in a corner having it passively regenerate. In order to get to that point, super regeneration will still have some passive component fueled by intellect at a significantly reduced rate, but you will now gain super energy by dealing and receiving damage to and from opponents. Here are the goals. In PvE, super uptime should be relatively unchanged, if not the slightest bit higher, as Bungie felt PvE supers were in a pretty good spot. Next, everyone should get at least one super in a 6v6 match that hits the time or score limit as long as they engage in regular combat. Bungie thinks super frequency in 6v6 is a little high, but we shouldn't expect a dramatic change in playlists like Control or Iron Banner, which I think is fine. Dropping supers to only one per match would be not enough. It would not be as fun. Supers in 3v3, however, should be less frequent, where 2 supers in a match is a regular occurrence. 3v3 is more intimate. It should be more about player skill, teamwork, and gunplay, not being passive waiting for supers. Totally fine with this. I get the philosophy shift. That's something we're going to talk about towards the second half of the video. Primary weapon play should have a noticeable benefit in super energy regeneration. This being something Bungie was talking about last week with wanting to give players a better reason to use an exotic primary in endgame content. Was it last week? I actually forget. I'm going to look right now. Exotic primary weapons are advanced event. Yeah, it was last week. Okay, yeah, it was last week. Bungie is scaling energy gains up and down based on the source of the damage, both dealt and received. Outgoing primary weapon damage has a significantly higher return on super energy per damage point than any other type of damage. And finally, different supers should come online at different times in a given match, and which one you pick should have an impact on how quickly it regenerates. Every super has basically had the same cooldown regardless of its power. Now that Bungie is making these changes, they're trying to address super o'clock, aka 3 minutes into a PvP match where everyone gets their super and the rest of the game is just insanity. Bungie also wants to open the build crafting space where your super's cooldown is an important thing besides just stack as much intellect as humanly possible, because why wouldn't you? Bungie has split the supers into tiers, aka how often they would like to see supers popping up. This is based on their kill potential. A one-off super is unlikely to completely wipe a team, but a roaming super can do a lot more. This is the first iteration, and adjustments will be made once this goes live and Bungie gets more data. Note that I believe this tier list has nothing to do with your tier stats in-game. It's just Bungie's, like, flow chart for their system, so they're not linked. At least, I don't think they are. Tier 5 has the fastest regeneration. Tier 1 is the slowest. The only ability so far in Tier 5 is Well of Radiance, as its kill potential is kind of zero. The super itself doesn't kill people. It's what you do in the super itself. Tier 4 is Blade Barrage and Silenced Squall. Tier 3 is Shadow Shot, Burning Maul, Arc Staff, Nova Bomb, and Thunder Crash. Tier 2 is Golden Gun, Chaos Reach, Nova Warp, Storm Trance, Daybreak, and Sentinel Shield. And the slowest regen, Tier 1, Spectral Blades, Fist of Hammock, Hammer of Soul, Glacial Quake, seeing a lot of Titan in here, and Winter's Wrath. This is also setting up for the future Subclass 3.0 systems. Things like Deadfall and Mobius Quiver variants of Shadow Shot will share the same cooldown, but with Void 3.0, they could be in different tiers based on their potency. Ward of Dawn will be in the Tier 5 section as it becomes a standalone super in Void 3.0. Moving to non-super abilities. Ability usage in Crucible is too high at the moment for their potency. Outliers stem from parts of the build crafting system that unified energy returns in all forms of combat, which Bungie has now actually taken a pass at. Across subclass perks, armor mods, and exotics, quote, we have tuned PvP energy regeneration separately from their base PvE value, which we are not changing, end quote. The absolute mad lads. Bungie took a look at items that feed into self-perpetuating loops of ability energy gains. So, starting with subclass neutral game perks, ability energy regeneration rates were reduced by around 50% in PvP, targeting perks that either activate out of combat with one button or those that were giving too much energy. Those perks are Whisper of Shards for Stasis, Arc Web for Stormcaller, Rising Storm for Stormcaller, Ionic Traces for Stormcaller, Electrostatic Surge for Stormcaller. Turns out Stormcaller can get a lot of energy. Aftershocks for Stormcaller. No, I'm just kidding. That one's Striker Titan. Inertia Override, Striker Titan. Benevolent Dawn, Dawnblade. Practice Makes Perfects for Gunslingers. Dark Matter for Voidwalkers. In super perks are perks that extend your super when you get a kill with your super, which led to very long supers. Refund Decay now happens twice as fast in PvP, meaning only in PvP will you not be getting as much energy for a kill. That's Everlasting Fire for Dawnblade and Trample for Striker Titan. Exotics. Frosties, aka sprinting for energy, are now additive, not multiplicative with other regen buffs in PvP only, no PvE change. Heart of Inmost Light, ability regen scalars, reduced by 50% in PvP, reworked so activating multiple abilities will now reliably result in multiple empowered stacks. Stacking behavior was a bug, now it's a feature. Controverse Hold, duration of the grenade regeneration buff is no longer random between 1 and 4 seconds. It's now a fixed 1.75 seconds. The previous average was 1.71 seconds, with 1 second being the most common. Regen scalar reduced by 50% in PvP. That's going to be a very common thing over the next few things that I say. Doomfang Pauldrons, reduced super energy gain on activation when an opposing player is killed by a void melee by 50%, no PvE change. Shinobu's Vow, aka double skip grenades, reduced energy gain by 66% on hits versus players, no PvE change. Crown of Tempest, grenade, melee, and energy regen scalar buff duration reduced from 7 seconds to now 4 seconds in PvP, no change in PvE. The Stag, aka Rifts Are Us, reduced rift energy gain by 50% on shield break in PvP, no change in PvE. Armor mods, reduced energy returns of the following mods by roughly 50% in PvP, depending on the number of copies you had equipped. Melee Grenade and Utility Kickstart, Perpetuation, Bolstering Detonation, Focusing Strike, Bomber, Outreach, Dynamo Distribution, Momentum Transfer, and Impact Induction. All of this is subject to further balance changes. This is just the first pass, and I suspect we will see many adjustments as Bungie is touching almost every single ability in the game. We don't have full patch notes for every single ability just yet. We're going to get those on the 7th. But let's take a look at some big notes here. Stasis Crystals. On top of freezing, they block line of sight, they block movement, and they explode, which is a lot. Stasis Crystals now slow instead of freeze, and they do less damage when they detonate in PvP. In PvE, they're actually increasing the detonation damage, as it was always better to just keep shooting an enemy versus the crystals to get that damage. Other notes for Stasis Crystals include increased slow/freeze radius while forming from 1.75 to 2.6 meters, reduced detonation damage versus players by around 55%, increased it in PvE by around 60%, and the detonation radius was increased from 6 to 8 meters. We will get to Shatter Dive in a moment. Hunter Dodge. In order to meet the goal of less ability usage, Bungie is reducing how often hunters can dodge and hitting Gambler's Dodge the hardest because of how you can have very high uptime on your melee ability. It will also no longer break projectile tracking, so you'll have to do something else to get out of the way of, like, say, a rocket. Marksman's Dodge. Base cooldown unchanged. Tier 10 cooldown has been increased from 11 seconds to now 14 seconds. Gambler's Dodge, base cooldown increased to 38 seconds, it was 29. Tier 10 cooldown is now 18 seconds, up from 11. Revenant. The Stasis Crystal changes make it so hunters will almost never be able to one-shot a full health player. It might still kill them if they're using Whisper of Fissures, Touch of Winter, and if the target is right in the middle of all 6 crystals, but that has been proven to be very rare in Bungie's playtesting. Any amount is too often for my personal tastes, but it's something. However, Shatter Dive is getting buffed in PvE. Shatter damage versus frozen PvE targets is increased by 100%. Grim Harvest is getting an additional fragment slot as well. Top Tree Arc Strider has Combination Blow, which basically required you to use Gambler's Dodge in order to, chain it. The cooldown is being reduced to 15 seconds. It used to be 96 to compensate for this change. Bottom Tree Night Stalker, Vanish and Smoke base melee cooldown is now 75 seconds, it used to be 96, and this is because it's a utility-based ability, so Bungie is okay with people being able to use it more. Titans, I got some bad news. I got some real bad news. Shoulder Charge is no longer a one-shot. Bungie is trying to reduce the amount of one-shot abilities in PvP that are frustrating to be hit by. As a result, it'll be quicker to activate, easier to hit with, you can go farther with it, and it's getting a PvE damage boost. but they will no longer one-shot. Seismic Strike reduced AoE damage from 90 to 40, now blinds enemies on hit. Base cooldown now 90 seconds, up from 82. Shield Bash gets the same treatment, although it does not blind. And Hammer Strike gets the same treatment, damage reduced from 170 to 120. Rally Barricade. It's still not being used. Cooldown is reduced to 32 seconds, it was 37. Towering Barricade, aka the good one, cooldown is now 40 seconds, up from 37. Bungie is hoping to tempt people into using Rally Barricade, which I still don't see them using, but we'll see. Behemoth Titans need a little bit of love. They want to make Diamond Lance a top tier pick for PvE, which I already thought it kind of was, but I'll take more, sure. Diamond Lance now has 3 fragment slots. It used to only have 1. You now get a Diamond Lance from killing a PvE enemy with a stasis weapon, killing 3 players in PvP with the stasis weapon in a single life, killing an enemy with a stasis ability, or shattering an enemy. Shiver Strike damage was increased by 50% while in Glacial Quake, and Whisper of Change, which just kind of pairs nicely, increased damage resistance versus PvE enemies to now 40%, it was 25%. Bottom Tree Striker. It is dominating PvP this season because their melee is insane. Knockouts, melee lunge range, and bonus damage goes away after a kill now. Trample had its super energy gains reduced as mentioned earlier. Knockouts base cooldown is now 106 seconds, it was 82, and the heavy slam radius on Fist of Havoc was reduced from 8 to 6 meters for bottom tree only. Warlocks, you're getting some good news. Your uncharged melee range bonus is no more. It's now the same as everybody else. The speed at which you melee is now the same as everybody else. No more losing punch battles because your melee is slower. Everyone, all classes, are now the same. It was a neat experiment, just not for Warlocks. Very good change. Handheld Supernova, much like Shoulder Charge, no longer one-shots. To compensate, it goes farther and it pushes enemies back. It also got a PvE damage boost against bosses and champions, along with Nova Warp, as Nova Warp, even with its buff, needed even more help. Handheld Supernova now deals 150 max damage to players. Damage versus champions and bosses increased by 30%. It's the same thing for Nova Warp on that one. Range increased from 12 to 14 meters, and it now pushes targets away from the Warlock. Shadebinder felt pretty good with a couple of things. Number one is that Winter's Wrath was absolutely bonkers for shutting down other supers, and it's not even remotely close. Winter's Wrath now must freeze enemies twice to kill them in their super. Penumbral Blast was too hard to land in PvE as a result of PvP changes that I got. They're increasing the proximity detonation radius by 100% in PvE to compensate. Also, because they're adjusting all grenade cooldowns, they didn't want people just picking the shortest stasis grenade cooldown for Bleak Watcher, so when you pick Bleak Watcher as an aspect, all of your grenades will have the same cooldown as Glacier Grenade, which I'm assuming is a longer cooldown. Okay, that's everything. Huge stuff. Huge stuff. Let's chat. Oh, no, wait, hang on. First, Xbox Game Pass people. Destiny stuff is leaving Xbox Game Pass on December 8th. That's Forsaken, Shadowkeep, Beyond Light. Once that stuff leaves, you will lose access to campaign missions, expansion-specific activities, Stasis, which is Beyond Light specific, Middle Tree supers for all subclasses, remember that was Forsaken, and the 10% off silver purchases and other game add-ons. Expansions should be discounted soon. I would not buy any of these expansions at full price, especially Forsaken with it getting a whole bunch of stuff removed and all that kind of stuff. Okay, now let's talk. I have no idea how any of this is going to play out, and I think anyone who claims that they do is a big liar lying out of their lying hole, at least in PvP. In PvE, I don't really feel like things are going to change substantially. Sure, some abilities are going to have some different cooldowns, but the main focus of this patch is to target PvP, and as a result, I think PvE stays relatively the same. Subclass 3.0 changes are going to be much more impactful on the game on the PvE side of things, I'll put it that way. This is tame to what I think is coming, so I don't really want to dwell too much on the PvE side. Hell, some underperforming things are getting tuned to be a little bit better, so overall I don't expect the landscape to really shift a whole lot here. One thing I'm pretty interested to see play out is the whole primary weapon damage giving the most super energy system thing, to see if it gives enough of a boost to boost exotic primaries in the end game. The last 2 seasons have really pushed a special and heavy weapon narrative thanks to Breach and Clear and Particle Deconstruction, and I think that's really skewed perspectives on exotic primary weapons, as primaries just feel like the thing you use to stun a champion and then you use a broken mod from the seasonal artifact to just blow up a champion. I'd love to bust out Outbreak Perfected again, as I find the gun to be really strong as an exotic primary, but why not just push the advantage you have with, fusions this season even more, or Anarchy last season? I'm kind of hoping not to see another particle type mod, and I feel like someone told me there was an article of an interview somewhere that Bungie said they weren't going to do that for Season 16 or potentially even farther into the future. I just don't really remember. Either way, I think no Omega seasonal mods plus this change could really help push exotic primaries forward once we see how much better they are at getting super energy. PvP, on the other hand, speaking as a more casual PvPer, I'm into Bungie's philosophy here. I get what they're trying to do. It's true, Crucible is absolutely dominated by abilities. Super o'clock, aka 3 minutes into a match, has been a problem for a while, even after Bungie made some adjustments for it going into Shadowkeep. It's still happening 2 years later. Passive super farming in trials. The main strat probably shouldn't be leaving someone alive in a 3v1 so you can get a bunch of super energy. You know what I mean? I'm into actually fighting things being the main way to get super energy, so I'm interested to see how that pans out. With regards to ability timers and all that, since we stuck to this system where everything's on the same cooldown, it made things kind of hard to balance, near impossible, because you had no flexibility on your cooldowns. But it was done for the sake of clarity, it felt like. It was easy to understand for players that grenades are on X cooldown, melee's on Y, and classes on Z. But it meant that you couldn't really change things up because everything had to be roughly the same power level, but it also meant that some things were just always going to be stronger because there's only so much you can do. Now, you can actually have stronger effects on a longer cooldown on a different ability, weaker on shorter. Even supers being on the same cooldowns, relatively speaking, was problematic because certain supers are much better than others. Shouldn't there be some discrepancy there? Blade Barrage isn't nearly as good as Spectral in PvP, but they're on the same cooldown. Now, I'm not looking forward to being solo Blade Barraged even more now, but I get it. This is something the community has wanted for a very long time. More separation between PvP and PvE. Different balancing for PvP and PvE. There's still going to be some overlap. That's always going to be the case with this game. But the more the two sandboxes can be unlinked, the better the health of both can be. Unfortunately, that does make for a more complex game for those not as in tune or immersed in the game, maybe new players as well. But for those immersed players, it's great. And I understand that's a battle that Bungie is always going to be fighting. Accessibility and ease of use versus depth or complexity or different sandboxes. The less you have to learn, the easier it is to get into the game. I know the TWAB was super long, but I really don't have that much else to say, I guess, besides talking about the individual classes. That's because it was just a lot of lists of things being affected. The overall message conveyed is Bungie doesn't want abilities being as dominant in PvP as they are right now. Here's everything that's contributing to that issue. Here's how we're nerfing their output in PvP specifically. Let's see how it goes. I'm not against this philosophy whatsoever, and I'm interested to see how it ends up playing out. It'll hopefully open up a bit more build diversity in PvP as well, which has been an issue as of late. A lot of PvP builds just end up being put on this exotic, and that's it. Maybe you stack a certain stat, but otherwise, it didn't feel like there was much going on there because cooldowns were so short and abilities were so strong on their own already. I want more gunfights. I want to see a world with more gunfights. Let's talk classes. Titans, losing shoulder charge, one-shots, pretty big blow, despite how often it felt like they failed, but if it's for the betterment of the game, so be it. Bungie's trying to cut down on one-shot abilities that are, quote, frustrating to be hit by, end quote. I'd argue that trying to even hit something with shoulder charge in PvP is itself frustrating, but they had to make it somewhat tough to use because it one-shot. So now by making it not one-shot, it can be easier to use. By contrast, Flux Grenade is the reverse. It one-shots, but with the tracking gone, it's much tougher to use and get a one-shot. I'm skeptical of Flux's new look, but I guess if no one uses it, not much is really going to change there. I'm also skeptical of Shoulder Charge not one-shotting because you're still left pretty vulnerable, and with how high-powered weapons are, not too sure about how good it'll even be to use it on people versus just using it for movement, which is a problem that we had a while ago. People were just using Shoulder Charge for movement, not to actually use it on people. Hunters, let's face it, dodge is easily the best class ability in the game on the shortest cooldown, with some great exotics attached to it. I didn't see class abilities getting adjusted that much with this patch, I will say that, but dodge is really, really strong, and it still will be. Let's not pretend 3 extra seconds on Marksman's dodge at tier 10 throws hunters into the garbage. Note that only projectile tracking is affected by the dodge changes. Aim assist is not projectile tracking. The fact that Shatter Dive still even has a chance to kill someone will never sit well with me personally, but I'm hoping these changes will be enough to deter at least some people from wanting to use it in PvP, as in my opinion, it is a game-ruining thing in my eyes. Warlocks, losing handheld Supernova as a one-shot is also potentially disappointing for some of you, but I also felt like it wasn't as prevalent in the meta, so this might not be stinging as hard for most of you. Winter's Wrath absolutely needed to be dropped down a peg, though. The missiles have insane tracking strength, the AoE radius feels gigantic, and it one-shots other supers. Not a chance that was going to stay the way it was. The melee attack speed change is fantastic. I don't know anyone who's going to complain about being able to punch at the same speeds as Titan and Hunters now. Maybe there are some people out there that had some sort of a range-based build or whatever you were doing, but for the whole of the game, this is a great change. Otherwise, since we don't really know exact cooldowns of all of the other abilities, which I'm not even sure I would have covered in this video because it would have been like an hour, I don't have much else to go on. It entirely depends on what abilities get what strengths and what weaknesses, because any ability can go in any direction. Maybe all bolt grenades are going short cooldown, low damage. Maybe some are stronger. Maybe flashbang and suppression are going short for their utility. Maybe they're going long because they're getting a big damage boost. I have no idea. We just don't know yet. Now, I'm sure there's going to be plenty of rough spots when this patch first deploys. But as long as Bungie stays on top of things and tweaks things as needed, I'm interested to see where this new Sandbox takes us. This is one of the most significant Sandbox patches we've had in the franchise. So it's going to take some time to iron things out. Let's not pretend this is going to be perfect on deployment. But I'm on board with the philosophies at play here. Less abilities and more shooting in PvP, more active super generation versus passive, more separation of PvE and PvP, and more potential for build crafting. It's how these philosophies are executed that will be the most impactful on the game. I don't think we're getting a brand new game here, and I'm sure there's going to be people out there who find the next cheesy BS that'll annoy everyone, but as long as Bungie can tweak efficiently and quickly, I'm pretty hopeful. That's all I got. Thanks very much for watching. I'll see you next time.